After World War II, Korea was free from Japanese rule. However, instead of staying one independent nation, it split itself along the 38th parallel. North of the parallel was North Korea, a communist nation backed by the communist Soviet Union. And south of the parallel was South Korea, a democratic nation backed by the United States of America. The Soviet Union supported North Korea because it wanted to spread communism to other parts of the world. The United States supported South Korea because it felt that if one nation became communist, the surrounding nations would become communist, and what was known as the domino theory. By 1950, all U.S. and Soviet troops had left North and South Korea, respectively. This created a power vacuum that the North Korean leader believed he could fill. Believing he could unify the two nations into one again, North Korean leader Kim Il sung invaded South Korea on June 25, 1950. South Korea, after being backed into a corner, called upon the United Nations for help to fight against the North Korean forces. 16 of the United Nations agreed, and they were all able to push back the North Korean forces to China. U.S. General Douglas MacArthur was not satisfied with just pushing back North Korean forces and making sure South Korea was safe. Instead, he wanted to unify all of Korea under a non-communist government, and he did just that. Over time, he was taking over North Korea to the point where they were pushed towards the Chinese border. China did not like the fact that United Nations forces were near their border, and so they joined the war and backed North Korea.
The Korean War eventually reached a stalemate by 1951. After years of brutal fighting, the battle line stabilized near the original dividing line between North and South Korea, close to the 30th parallel. Neither side was able to gain a decisive victory, despite massive military efforts and enormous losses on both sides. What had started as a fast-moving conflict slowly turned into a war of attrition, where each side fought to hold its position rather than make major advances. For the next 2 years, the war became a deadly standstill. Even when the peace negotiations were taking place, heavy fighting continued across the Korean peninsula. Soldiers lived in harsh conditions, dealing with freezing winters, rough terrains, shortage of supplies, and constant danger from enemy attacks. Many battles during the period were fought over hills and defensive positions that changed hands multiple times. Thousands of lives continued to have been lost, though discussions about ending the war were already underway. The peace negotiations were difficult and slow because both sides strongly disagreed on several important issues, especially the exchange and repatriation of prisoners of war. Negotiators met for months without making much progress, and tensions remained extremely high. The war had already caused tremendous destruction, and both Korea and its people were exhausted by years of violence. Finally, on July 27, 1953, an armistice agreement was signed. This agreement officially stopped the fighting and created a ceasefire between North Korea, China, and the United States forces. Led mainly by the U.S., however, it is important to understand that the armistice was not a true peace treaty. The Korean War never officially ended. Technically, North and South Korea were still at war today, because no permanent peace agreement was ever signed. As part of the armistice, a demilitarized zone, or DMZ, was established between the two countries. The DMZ stretched across the Korean peninsula and acts as a buffer zone separating North and South Korea. Despite its name, the area surrounding the DMZ is heavily militarized with soldiers, fences, guard towers, and landmines on both sides. Today it remains one of the most heavily guarded borders in the entire world. The Korean War had major long-term effects that still shape the modern world today. Multiplying the Korean War, Korea remains permanently divided into two separate nations, North and South Korea. Millions of families were separated during the war, and many never saw each other again. The division created deep emotional scars that continue across generations. The war also intensified the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, increasing global tensions, encouraging future conflicts in places such as Vietnam. Over time, South Korea rebuilt itself from the destruction of war and became one of the world's leading economies, known for technology, education, entertainment, and global companies. In contrast, North Korea became one of the most isolated, tightly controlled nations on Earth, ruled by a strict authoritarian government. Even today, the effects of the Korean War continue to influence international relationships, military strategy, and peace efforts around the world. Although the fighting stopped in 1953, the conflict's impact is still felt more than 70 years later, reminding us that war can continue to shape nations and people long after battles themselves have ended.